I'm Dr. Clemens. Let's talk about Chapter 2, Inclusive Recreation History and Legislation. This country will not be a good place for any of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in. President Theodore Roosevelt. Why understanding history is important. Understanding the past helps us to avoid repeating past mistakes, learn from past successes, and predict the consequences of actions. Understanding the history of a profession provides a professional identity, and historical research creates and shapes current perceptions of reality. The evolution of inclusion. Historically, people outside societal norms have been mistreated and marginalized. Ancient Greece, Renaissance in Italy, and the Age of Reason in Europe and America are examples of how inclusion has evolved. In the 20th century America before 1950, racism and segregation dominated. Forced assimilation into white stream culture, disability viewed as social and an economic burden, and at forced sterilization was commonplace. After 1950, deinstitutionalization during the 60s and 70s, the normalization principle started taking place, and the inclusion movement was widespread by the 90s. Legislation in the United States, minority groups have historically been invisible in the United States. Starting in the earliest 20th century, a series of civil rights acts were passed into law. Litigation has and continues to shape the provisions of these laws. Early achievements include 1924 Indian Citizenship Act, the Rehabilitation Legislation, and the Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. In the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it guaranteed basic civil rights to all Americans regardless of race. It did not address discrimination based on disability status, sex, or age, however. Architectural Barriers Act of 1968 provides equal environmental access for all people, set accessibility standards for agencies, organizations, and businesses, covers both facilities and programs, includes all facets of parks, recreation, and tourism, and the initial effect was minimal but led later to the passage of the ADA. Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972 required federally funded educational institutions to provide women with educational treatment, opportunity, and resources equal to those provided for men for most of its programs and activities. Title IX is not just sports. Academically speaking, it includes science, medicine, and law, healthcare and dormitory facilities, non-sport activities, and school clubs. The Rehab Act of 1973 provides equal access for people with disabilities through the removal of architectural barriers, employment barriers, and transportational barriers. Further supported the rights of persons with disabilities through affirmation action. Section 504 in the San Francisco Sit-In is an example. Here are individuals picketing at the UN Plaza in front of the Federal Building in San Francisco, California, on April 5, 1977. Age Discrimination Acts. There's one in 1975 and the Age Employment Act of 1967. The Right to Education. Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act 1990, and No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. The Americans with Disability Act of 1990 provides for physical and programmatic access in these areas: employment, government services, transportation, public service, and telecommunications. Intent is for full participation, inclusion, and integration of people with disabilities. In summary, understanding our history is important. In the past, recreation was used to abuse, humiliate, and marginalize people outside societal norms. This history should not be forgotten so that contemporary leisure professionals feel an ethical obligation to go beyond minimal standards in providing inclusive services.